This is WWE superstar Drew McIntyre, and you're listening to the WWE Podcast.
The champ is the one that everybody wants, me.
Becky Lynch is going to WrestleMania. Claymore!
Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass. This is my idol. You're going to acknowledge me.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to, I guess what we're calling here, New School versus Old School, the pilot episode. My name is Mimi Burris, and I'm here with Michael Gross. Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing absolutely fantastic. How you doing?
I'm great. Yeah, I was just talking about, we just finished up an AEW Dynamite review show, and essentially talking about probably one of the worst Dynamites of 2021, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We are going to try something a little bit new here, and so I hope you don't mind me exposing you here, Michael, but I am a 23-year-old female, right? So my demographic of professional wrestling, or my perspective, I guess, of professional wrestling is the best way to put it, is probably very different than Michael's, who is not a 23-year-old female. And so, therefore, we thought it'd be interesting to now, whether it's lists, whether it's whatever, I guess we'll kind of figure it out on the fly, but have a show here, and we'll see how this goes, obviously, but have a show here where we can, finally, maybe we'll have some freaking debate here on the WWE podcast and disagree on some stuff and whatever, be able to, yeah, just have a healthy conversation. I won't call it a debate, a healthy conversation of what maybe, I don't want to call myself new school, but I guess that's what I'm doing by calling this new school, old school. But new school kind of wrestling versus maybe an older school or an older perspective on professional wrestling. I don't know if you have anything to add about that, Michael, but I that's the best way I can summarize this, is what we're doing here.
I think that's a great summary. So what people don't know is obviously Mimi and I have been talking off air, and we came up with this idea because me being a 46-year-old man and being into wrestling for a very long time, we have different opinions and we have different mindsets and different views on what's a star and what creates a star and what makes somebody better than somebody else, and what moves the needle and what exactly is important and what is must-see TV. And so when I listen to the podcast and all the co-hosts like Anthony DeMarco and Zach and everybody else and Mimi and Ashley and I, Matt, we all love each other. We're a great big family, but sometimes I listen to more like Ashley and Mimi and I see, okay, a female point of view is different from a male's point of view. And especially with the age difference, we see so many different things and see so many different nuances within a character. And that's why you glom onto TV, and that's why you say this is good and this is bad. So what we want to do is kind of put it in perspective and try a new show out and see if we can maybe grab your attention and maybe fill some dead space that might be out there. If you have a drive to work, we might be able to help you out.
That is the best time to listen to these podcasts. That's actually, I'll never forget, I had a 10-hour drive to, I don't know, somewhere in North Carolina or Virginia, some weird, it was a long drive, and I remember listening to probably 4 or 5. I didn't listen to them on purpose, so I'd have something to listen to on that long drive of Matt's podcast and Zach Smith talking about, no, it's Anthony DeMarco talking about the Ruthless Aggression era for some reason on a Raw review. So yes, that's what we're here to do, is fill your time if you're interested in hearing, again, like I said, I think a good healthy debate on some new school versus old school. So with that being said, with that, all intros aside now, our first topic we thought we'd go with was the top 5 gimmicks of all time. And I think this is obviously all credit to Michael Gross on this one, super interesting idea because, I mean, now, as we can tell on WWE, it seems to be going more towards gimmick heavy again, when for a while we were gimmick light. And, back in the day, they were very gimmick heavy. And in professional wrestling as a whole, that's tide is not necessarily exactly what's happening. I don't think AEW is very gimmick heavy, maybe. But, so it's interesting to look, again, what is perceived as a gimmick was a conversation we had a bunch too. Again, what gimmicks more so affected us personally, whatever, because I think, again, before we get into this, all of professional wrestling, any opinion on any of your views on professional wrestling are all subjective. So I think that's just an important disclosure to make, and that's exactly what this whole thing is about, is our subjective takes on top 5 gimmicks of all time. So I think, Michael's opinions are going to be, or Michael's top 5 is going to be super different than mine, just on what we watched, obviously when we were alive and all the like. So I'm excited to get into it, Michael.
Absolutely. And, with a subject like this, what what has gotten us in the past few years, and the reason we've had a ratings dip is because WWE went into that whole modern era style thing where you didn't have a gimmick anymore, which is okay. Because when I was a kid and I'd see Scott Hall from AWA turn into the Diamond Stud, I'm like, that's Scott Hall. And then he becomes Razor Ramon. I'm still in my teens and early 20s going, that's Scott Hall. Why can't he just be Scott Hall? Then he becomes Scott Hall again and has the biggest push of his career. On the flip side of it, though, in the current product, you have these first and last name wrestlers, and they think it's a gimmick by chopping off part of their name. Matt Riddle's just Riddle. Well, that's stupid. The guy fought in UFC is Matt Riddle. He's Matt Riddle, okay? Bill Goldberg is Bill Goldberg. Yes, people are going to chant Goldberg, but you don't just say he's Goldberg. The biggest case with this was when Ryback came out. He's just Ryback. Like, how did you expect people to actually accept this? He's Ryback. What does that even mean? Is he John Ryback? Is he Paul Ryback? He's just Ryback. That was dumb. And, of course, he was such a clone of Goldberg. We're not going to get into that here on there or whatever. And then the other thing is, because people didn't have something to sink your teeth into and understand the character, which is part of the gimmick, because the gimmick builds the character. What were they? Who are they? You look at Sami Zayn. So is he supposed to be a cab-driving, red-headed Canadian from Serbia? I don't get it. And that's why he's been so lost in the shuffle. But if you put him out as his old Ring of Honor El Generico, we got something to sink our teeth into. And that's why they keep going back and turning today's wrestlers into old characters, because they don't have a gimmick. Now, I'm not saying you have to have the wrestling garbage man, because we always pick on Duke the Dumpster DeRossi. Sorry, buddy, but you're always going to be the target. But you have to have something. And so with that being said, what's really sad, and I think the reason that they're kind of going back to gimmicks is because most gimmicks today have become what people's ethnicity is, which is actually a form of racism. Shinsuke Nakamura is obviously very Japanese. Jinder Mahal is very Indian, although I think he's actually Canadian, which is kind of weird. Sheamus, he's the Celtic warrior. We got to drive it down your throat that he's from, Ireland, everything else. It's so stupid. Like, your gimmick has to be that you're foreign. And then if you're American, they don't know what to do with you. It's so silly. And you see, this is why people are lost in the shuffle, because we have nothing to sink our teeth into or nothing to build momentum behind. And that's why certain people have stuck out, because they lived their character, they lived their dream, because they were the real living gimmick.
So absolutely, and I know you mentioned Razor Ramon there. That's part of my honorable mentions. So that's a good transition for us to get into the meat and potatoes of this. I did have a couple honorable mentions before we get into our top five, and I'll throw it over to you first, obviously, to take the first one. But I do want to quickly mention, because I want to give them credit where it's due. I said no racist, bigots, any of that stuff in my top fives. That's just one of my own rules. But I will mention Vince McMahon, because the man was the biggest heel for years and years and years. Created the Stone Cold character. Definitely needs to be mentioned here. The late great Brody Lee absolutely completely saved the Dark Order. That gimmick had so much more juice in it that obviously was cut short by tragedy. I was thinking about a couple other people. Who else did I have on the top of my head? Oh, El Champion, I think. Chris Jericho, or your first ever AEW World Champion. Chris Jericho is the master at reinventing himself. You could probably make a list of top 5 Chris Jericho gimmicks, So I did want to give a nod to Chris Jericho and his most recent gimmick, obviously, of El Champion, which I think was so important for AEW specifically, in being a draw for more casual fans to a new pro wrestling company. So I wanted to throw out those names there before you get into your top 5. Do you have any honorable mentions you couldn't make the list?
Well, I'm going to say should be on the list, but isn't Kurt Angle, because he, just like Jericho, has reinvented himself a million times. Not really a million times as much as, when he first came in, he was supposed to be taken seriously. The people booed him. He was supposed to be the biggest babyface in the world, and he stunk up the place, not with his wrestling, but with him just being so vanilla, white milk, Hulk Hogan, take your vitamin kind of thing, that people didn't like it. So he told them not to boo him, which was off script. And they turned on him more, so they turned him heel, made him goofy. Usually people do not recover from comedy. We both know this. Once you go comedy, it's usually the end of your career. And he went comedy, but his wrestling spoke so well, he got better and better and better, and they kept pushing him. And it irritated a lot of people that a comedic wrestler was being pushed so hard. And then his wrestling just got off the frame, and then he got more intense, more intense, and more intense, and reinvented himself so many times as he was a character within the same person. Kind of like Jericho was a character within the same person. Although for Angle to be the man to make Stone Cold tap out, when you started off saying, dancing around, acting like goofball, but always winning your matches, and then wearing a cowboy hat and singing, and nobody knew why you were in the main events of stuff. You got to put Angle up there. I'm going to put this one in there. Papa Shango. Charles Wright, the Godfather, whatever you want to call him. Now, I know, look, he's actually a really nice guy. This is best gimmicks
of all time. No, that and the worst gimmicks is the one we're doing next.
Exactly, but I will say for reinventing himself, the guy, his gimmick forward thing and trying to, find his niche, because a lot of people don't know that he would wrestle, he'd get cut by WWF/E, and he'd just go be a bouncer in a adult club in Vegas, and then he'd get a call to come back and wrestle. They have something new for him. So he reinvented himself. But another honorable mention I'm going to put on here is Jerry Lynn, because I saw him first in the 4 p.m. time slot for Global on ESPN in the 90s as Jerry Lynn, and he was an amazing light heavyweight, and then disappeared for a while, honed his craft around the world, and then reappeared in WCW as a luchador under a mask known as Mr. J.O. And then went to ECW, became Jerry Lynn again, and then kind of just went on with his career. But he portrayed a different version of himself, so I'll throw that in. It's not a great gimmick, but for a while I was like, who's this Mr. JL? Until he did a couple of Jerry Lynn spots, and I was like, oh, I get it now. I'm the idiot. To fool me, I like it.
No, that's a great show. When you were talking about Kurt Angle, I was thinking about way back, Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle, who you'd think, when you think about the two guys, should have this super serious feud, and some of the stuff they did in those backstage skits were so funny. Just like so childish, so immature, but just like the best kind of humor. So absolutely, those are all great shots. Well, give me your number 5. You could take it first, Michael. The first ever something on this podcast.
All right. So one of the best gimmicks of all time, had over 20 years staying power, and still these guys need to hang it up. I love you guys, but you were entertaining me when I was 10. I'm 46. Come on, guys. The Rock and Roll Express. Now I'm going to give it, there is no more sympathetic tag team in the history of tag teams, in the history of wrestling, that could put on a show like the Rock and Roll Express. First of all, they charmed every lady at the ringside. Sorry, my stuttering kicks up, but whatever. They were so over that they outsold monster truck show rallies in Tulsa. Okay, these guys could do anything they wanted. But they dressed in the bandanas. They even learned how to play instruments and lip sync to songs to have their own silly little intro thing. I mean, these guys lived their gimmick. Today, they're still wrestling as the Rock and Roll Express. At this point, they should be the Blues Express, or the gospel, whatever the roots of music is. Because, dear Lord, let it go, guys. Retire. But the fact is, they lived the gimmick. They made every woman fawn at ringside, and they and the Midnight Express could sell out arenas as if it was Hogan and Warrior. Now, we're not talking 15,000 people WrestleMania, 20,000 people WrestleManias, but we are talking 10,000 seat stadiums. We're talking the Kiel Auditorium. We are talking, Louisville Gardens. We are talking the Mid-South Coliseum. They did this in their circuits, and it's insane how much these guys, people would attack members of the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette and anybody who wrestled him, whether it be the PYTs, whether it be, who they feud with. It just seems like everybody. Anyone they would feud with, people had batteries thrown at them. The opponents got attacked, knifed. When you have a gimmick that strong that you can turn on every female in the crowd, that husbands and boyfriends are sending you hate letters, is that positive heat? I don't know what that is. But husbands are sending you positive letters. Could you stay off TV this week because my wife isn't paying attention to me? That's more than being over. That is living your gimmick. That is way higher than anything else. And to follow up on this also, have you ever read Chris Jericho's first book, Around the World in Spandex?
No, but my fiance bought his new book, so where he's detailed every single match he's ever had.
Okay, so in his first book, he talks about wrestling for Smoky Mountain before he got to WCW, ECW, blah 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And he talked about a lady, this weird hillbilly family that filmed a bunch of his matches and sent it to him. And instead of it being his matches, it was his family doing an ode to how much they loved he and Lance Storm. It's a really good read. It's really funny. But he said as the VHS camera pans around the house, there is a picture in the house of Jesus Christ hung equally as high as the Rock and Roll Express. And that's how much the gimmick was taken seriously in the South. He said it is a blessing for our Lord and Savior to be almost held as high as the Rock and Roll Express.
Yeah, I can't debate with you much because I honestly, of course I'm familiar with the Rock and Roll Express, but I don't know enough. But I'll say this. If I, again, at my age and the stuff that I've watched and even familiar with you, whatever, the Rock and Roll Express, whoever, the Midnight Express as well, whatever it is, you've done something right because your name's still living on to this point and not living on because of some bad controversy. So I can't debate with you much. I thought about a couple tag teams. I will tell you, I don't have any tag teams on my list, so I'm glad you do. And I think that's a great shout. You've encouraged me to go do some more research on the Rock and Roll Express, whether it's watching some of their old matches, promos. I take it back. I've definitely seen some of their work. It's just been a while for me. So I think that's a good first candidate. I like that pick.
Well, thank you. You know, the one interaction I had with them is I was running a jazz club on Beale Street in Memphis. And, of course, they've done a lot of one-shots in Memphis. Memphis was the mecca of wrestling at one point, but this is about 7 years ago. I'd have a bartender. He goes by Nighthawk, and Nighthawk goes outside, and he's a big wrestling fan. I see him talking to two people. Then he comes in his own special way. He says he's talking to he's talking to the Rock and Roll Express. By the way, when I say his own special way, it's because you can't understand a word Nighthawk says. It's just almost foreign to you. And he's American. You just don't understand a word he says. So I go out there and I see them, and these are not the guys I saw when I was 10 years old, you know. But they're still, yeah, we got a show tonight, brother. How you doing? Like living the gimmick, loving it. And so I just said, I just want you guys to know that you should beware because I heard the tennis rackets up the street, which is a reference to Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express, and they both just gave me this dirty look and walked off. So that's my one time with the Rock and Roll Express.
And they're still going strong. Well, not strong, but they're still going, I guess.
They're still rocking and rolling. That party has never ended, sister.
Crazy. All right, my first pick is definitely on a complete opposite side of the Rock and Roll Express, and we talked about this a little bit before, so this is my number one. And I was thinking too, when you think about the greatest gimmicks of all time, what's the criteria? Again, it's all subjective. So like, your longevity could be one, or for me, in this particular specifically, is potential. You know, potential in this gimmick that just never got fleshed out, and that is CM Punk and the rest of the Straight Edge Society. This, for me, again, I was at an age really, I guess I kind of knew. I didn't know what Straight Edge was until I had seen CM Punk and the Straight Edge Society. I was also a giant CM Punk fan, obviously, at a young age, too. But you had CM Punk, Serena Deeb, who, by the way, is one of the greatest wrestlers in the world right now, man or woman, top five without a doubt.
Underrated. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you.
No, please do. Anything to promote Serena Deeb. For anybody who's not seen any Serena Deeb matches or is unfamiliar with Serena Deeb, if you remember the Straight Edge Society, she was the woman with the shaved head, the beautiful woman with the shaved head. No longer has a shaved head. But she is a ring general if there ever was one. She could, you always hear the expression, but she could wrestle a 5-star match with a broomstick. You really genuinely could. That woman is just incredible. And so really think about the potential Serena Deeb had, even in that era of the women's wrestling, if you want to call it women's wrestling. Serena Deeb was a diamond in the rough, and they really missed the boat on that one, but we'll have to talk about that a little bit more. You had Luke Gallows, obviously, now Doc Gallows in AEW, formerly Festus. So this guy, CM Punk, right, this guy, you might have heard of him, might have debuted on this recent, that there might be a little bit of, bias there, by the way, but might have debuted recently on this promotion in North America. I don't know if you've heard of it, AEW.
I'm not sure.
It's pretty cool. I'll give it a watch. Anyways, he takes Serena Deeb, someone, again, severely underutilized, underrated. I don't know her talents at that time either, but there had to be something there considering what she's been doing now. You had Luke Gallows, who was formerly Festus, so you took Festus, and Serena Deeb, and on here it says Joseph Mercury. I'm not remembering that, so maybe you'll have to refresh my memory.
He was there for a hot second. It was a flip on the map before they bounced him out.
Yeah, I don't remember that. But obviously the gimmick being, everybody else, Serena Deeb shaved her head, you had Luke Gallows with a shaved head, and you had CM Punk with the long beard and the hair and the long hair, and this was obviously like a prelude to later on people like Seth Rollins, who did the Messiah gimmick. So many, shades of the Straight Edge Society in that gimmick, and that's another one that never got to be fleshed out. But CM Punk coming out as a heel, turns heel, and obviously he is straight edge, never had a drug, never had a drink, I'm better than you, putting the hand out to the TV. I remember there was some Elimination Chamber match, and I'm going to forget what it was, but he had pinned R-Truth. Nobody was thinking R-Truth was going to win that match, and he pins R-Truth. And then we get, Matt Striker's on commentary. I still can hear Matt Striker in my nightmares at night. But Matt Striker's on commentary talking about how we're going to get a Sermon on the Mount, and I actually thought that was a great shout. And, doing his typical straight edge thing, even in the confines of WWE, CM Punk managed to shine on the microphone with this gimmick. And this was the first time I really got to see CM Punk for what he was as a talent on the microphone, not just in the ring. Great feud with Rey Mysterio. We had a great feud with Kane. Maybe not as good of a feud. I think the best feud was with Rey Mysterio. And look at that. You have Seth Rollins, the Messiah, eye versus eye, or whatever, eye for an eye feud with Rey Mysterio once again, how many years later. It's, nothing original yet. But with the Big Show, and then sadly, right, this obviously was in 2009, they really never got to get fleshed out. I think they broke up in 2010. Serena Deeb being released from her contract. I think there was a DUI something-esque in there, from what I remember. I have not done research on that, and I don't even think it's that. Maybe but
she should probably get the Usos lawyer. But
yes,
hey,
exactly, right? She should probably get Roman Reigns and marry him or become related to him. But so anyways, she got released, really being Straight Edge Society and getting some kind of DUI thing that's not going to flesh so well. And despite just having a DUI in general, and then obviously I think it was, we had a match with it was a handicap match versus the Big Show something. We had CM Punk turning on Luke Gallows, and really nothing ever happened for Luke Gallows, obviously, as he was released as well and then came back with the OC. But yeah, disbanded September 3rd, 2010, forming in November 27th, 2009. This is my number one, really, like I said, for the potential of it. First of all, we got to see, like I said, CM Punk for the first time as the talent he was on the microphone. There was a little shines here and there. He had a great feud with The Undertaker, but for the most part, this was like CM Punk, I felt like, in his element. And then you think of the talent that was in this, sorry, Joseph Mercury, but Joey Mercury. It feels weird to call him Joseph Mercury. Joey Mercury. CM Punk, obviously, who became one of the greatest wrestlers in the world, if not, quote-unquote, the best in the world. Serena Deeb, who, like I said, is top 5 right now in the world. And Luke Gallows, who is a man who is getting paid by how many companies right now and barely lifting a finger. So props to Doc Gallows today, obviously, for what he's doing. You get your check, Doc Gallows. So yeah, this I couldn't leave this out. This was huge for me as a kid, just remembering the Straight Edge Society, booing them because he was great at being a heel, CM Punk, and a great promo, but also being really interested in what's this guy about? This guy's got something. To me, this was CM Punk's coming out party. So yeah, that's number one for me.
Well, first of all, it's a great pick, and I'm going to tell you why. because it is the antithesis of Hulk Hogan, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, listen to your parents, and worship God, and make sure that you eat vanilla ice cream and love all people. Like, that's what CM Punk was supposed to be, but it was the evil twist. And it wasn't even evil. He was doing the exact same shtick. I don't drink. I don't do drugs. I'm better than you.
Yeah.
Hogan just didn't say I was better than you. And that's what made it so great, is that
And,
they took something.
he did do a couple drugs here and there from what I've heard.
Well, I don't know. I don't know the guy personally. But what I can say is, the point is, it's the same shtick that we got in the 80s, but it was spun, and we loved it more because he could actually wrestle, where Hogan couldn't wrestle his way out of a white paper bag with hopes and prayers in his pocket. And it sucks that the society, I mean, like you're saying, so the society should have got a bigger push, but it's hard to put people into a better push. Now, what I loved is WWE finally finished the storyline. He was Festus because he was on drugs, but CM Punk got him clean, so now he was Gallows.
Is that what
That
happened?
is a complete... Yes.
I don't
He
remember
said,
that.
You knew him as Festus, but I got him clean. His real name is Doc Gallows. Yeah. He did know
Long-term
that.
storytelling.
And, yes, which... honestly, I don't know if that's an audible on CM Punk's part or not. I mean, everything has to go through the boss, but... with that being said, it's like, wow, we actually finished the storyline. I like that. But Gabe, how do you waste a talent like that? Now, of course, they didn't know that 7 years later that you would have the Four Horsewomen and the influx of talent, because I think there are women outside the four who are really talented. Like, I still think that Alexa Bliss has a lot more to offer, but that's for another show. But the fact is, that's a great pick. That's a fantastic pick.
Yeah,
I
they
also
didn't.
think that...
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you
Go
off.
ahead.
Not only did
No, go ahead.
they not know they were going to have the four horsewomen, they just, Michael, and plainly they didn't know that women could wrestle. Believe it, they didn't know that women were talented or were able to be just as talented as men. But turns out, figured out, oh yeah, women are really good at wrestling too. It doesn't matter what their gender is. Mind blown.
I know that I know it's so it must really disgust you that all of a sudden women can wrestle, but Serena Deeb, that's hey, what kind of TNA can we put on the TV today? You had a good unit. It's the fact that with a storyline like they did, you knew it was going to be limited until they turned Punk face, because he had so much momentum building. It was like the Randy Savage effect from the early 80s, from WrestleMania, I think, 2 to 3, where he was just so good in the ring that people cheered him no matter what, and he became a face. Or was it 3 to 4? It might have been 3 to 4. But it was just the momentum turned. Like, he just kept getting better and better. And Chris Benoit, the fallen one, he had that same momentum as the Horseman. They disbanded the Horseman, and they didn't know what to do, so they just put him out there every week, and he was having the best match. And all of a sudden, you go from this guy who was supposed to heal, and he has no affiliation. All of a sudden, he's just going out there wrestling the best match. All of a sudden, everybody was behind him, and Punk had that. And so it's like, okay, we got to disband because they didn't know what to do. How do you not know what to do with Gallows? How do you not know what to do with somebody as talented as Serena Deeb? I get Joey Mercury. I mean, he was transitioning into being a backstage producer at that point anyway. But you could do things with that. So you've got a great pick there, in my opinion.
All right, appreciate that. And Joey Mercury did end up going bald, so that did happen. He shaved his head for them. So long-term storytelling once again. Yeah, no, I think that's all a bunch of great points. I'll say though, the only thing I will say is that you can be really good in the ring and still be a heel. And I know that at that time that was like a really foreign concept, I think, because it was not a thing really. But nowadays, obviously, I mean, again, debatably, and that's a whole nother podcast, we could probably just talk about this, but the Young Bucks are debatably the greatest tag team in the world, considered by many. I'm not saying that's necessarily my opinion, but considered by many one of the greatest tag teams in the world right now. They're amazing in the ring, and God, are those guys the most obnoxious human beings that walk the planet Earth right now. They are playing their part so well. MJF is incredibly talented in the ring. He only shows you, when he has to, right? But the guy is incredible in the ring. So there's a way to do it, but I hear what you're saying. CM Punk was undeniable. However, they somehow managed to deny him, but undeniable. So, I'm glad you approved the first pick. I see again. This is what we were talking about: new school, old school. The difference in our picks. Although mine's 2010, you got Rock and Roll Express. I guess yours is technically more current than mine if they're still wrestling.
I mean, theoretically, my next pick for you is a guy who's actually listened to our podcast. Okay, and he has probably had his gimmick ripped off the most in the last, I'd say, 25 years. And his gimmick was a ripoff too. A man that when they launched NXT UK, they gave him his own 30-minute documentary, the exotic one, Adrian Street. Now, Adrian Street was bringing the questionably sexuality gimmick into the forefront. I mean, Gorgeous George had it, but Gorgeous George's whole thing was he was a wrestling man. He was just gorgeous and rich. You shouldn't touch him. Adrian Street took it to a whole new level of androgyny, making it as if you didn't know if he was straight, gay, whatever. And the fact that the guy could legitimately tie you into a human pretzel and kick you for a while was amazing. He won a match by kissing Terry Taylor on the face. He won a championship. I think it was the UWF, or back then Mid-South championship, by kissing him on the face, and then the shock of Terry Taylor, he rolled him up. But when you hit go, the man could destroy people in the ring. He used to wrestle all kinds of people that other people could not handle. Other wrestlers were afraid that they would shoot on because he started at 15 in the coal mine, came out and wrestled the carnival circuit and wrestled every circuit he could as a true man. But when he made his debut, he was treated so bad, he changed it into this gimmick to stay relevant. He thought he was going to be the next Nature Boy, like, Buddy to Ric Flair, so on and so forth. He thought he was going to be like that, and people ridiculed him. And you can see all that in the documentary. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But the fact is, he honed his craft. He forced his own gimmick by making fun of his hecklers. And then he evolved it and evolved it and evolved it. Now the man's retired. He's living, I think, in England. Great guy. We chat back and forth on Facebook, stuff like that. The man is damn near 80 years old and in amazing shape. His biceps are the size of my legs, okay? He still works out. He's still with Miss Linda. And his gimmick was ripped off by Goldust, Kiwi, the Prince formerly known as Prince Iaukea, Velveteen Dream. The list goes on. Dalton Castle, all of them. There were so many people that wanted to mimic and emulate Adrian Street, but there was only one legend. I mean, he was more than just an androgynous gimmick. He lived the gimmick. He did it. He made money. He never went to WWF to compromise, or WWE as you know it now, to compromise his gimmick or compromise anything he does. The man is truly a man that set and paved the way for other wrestlers and who followed in his footsteps, but nobody has ever achieved what he has. You can argue Goldust, but if you didn't have Adrian Street, you never would have had Goldust. That's period. There's no argument. There's no doubt in my mind. And the fact that he could do anything he wanted in the ring. He's 80 years old, in fantastic shape, and he's never compromised a thing. I got nothing to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is another one I'm familiar with the name of, but I'm not necessarily familiar with a lot of his work. But again, I didn't watch a lot of NXT kind of around more Velveteen Dream, Adam Cole time, and really thank God for that, because that's another person I do not care to ever speak on this podcast. But I do know that when the controversy about him came up around that time, that is when I heard the names. Again, obviously I'm familiar with Goldust, but of Adrian Street, and being able to look into that and his matches. I think we used Ravish. There was a really good match in WCW. It was Rick Rude, wasn't it? Am I thinking of?
Love Rick Rude, man. I miss that guy. But he was not the same. He was more the ladies' man kind of guy.
No, but I'm trying to think of any of the matches I've seen with Adrian Street, and I remember him having a match against Rick Rude, I assume in WCW. Again, on those weird, and I could be thinking of the wrong person, but I'm talking about when I was younger, I just went on YouTube and just looked up. If you're a closet wrestling fan as a kid, like I was, because of my generation, there was no Attitude Era. There was never a cool time to be a wrestling fan. The only quote-unquote cool thing was John Cena, but he was kind of a walking meme, so it wasn't really even cool. Yes, there was nothing cool about being a wrestling fan. I remember when I met John Cena, actually, total diatribe, in 5th grade, and I got his autograph, and I was cool for a day, and that was about it. So that's when I peaked, in 5th grade, when I got John Cena's autograph, socially at least. But if you're a closet wrestling fan, you get it when you're just sitting alone in your room watching old random wrestling stuff. Just random. Shout out to Zach Smith's Random Wrestling podcast, by the way. But you're just watching random wrestling stuff on YouTube. I remember seeing something with Adrian Street, and I think it was Rick Rude, if I'm correct. Again, I can't debate with you much, but I can say that Goldust, for me, was another trailblazer, again, because of Adrian Street. And then now you have people who feel more comfortable being flamboyant, being being Adrian Street like, right? And I don't want to make the comparison, but the best thing I can think of now in like modern day, because obviously Goldust is now Dustin Rhodes in AEW, is a Sunny Kiss. Different situation there. Totally don't want to get into the political view, like ness of all that, and I don't mean to, again, if that offends anyone, I don't mean to make that comparison like that. But I assume, right, when you are able to see, a man, again, like you said, he still looks great in his older age now too, but when you're able to see somebody go out there and own that gimmick, you know what I mean? I'm sure it allows for again, your Goldust to be able to go out there and own that gimmick. And be comfortable with the fact, that's what was so good about Goldust. Again, I can't make a lot of comments on Adrian Street, but I can about Goldust. That was what was so interesting, is he didn't play Goldust, he was Goldust.
Yes. He lived that gimmick. And did you ever hear the story about Ahmed Johnson attacking him?
I did not.
So Goldust was told to give Ahmed Johnson a kiss in the ring, and Ahmed said he wasn't going to do it. And so in the ring, of course, Goldust is very much, Dustin Rhodes is a company man. So he gives him the fake kiss in the ring, and Ahmed shot on him and beat him. Well, Ahmed was still in a feud with Ron Simmons, Farouk. And Farouk and his family go back with the Rhodes. And it was many things that compiled to this, but basically it also lumped onto Ahmed had injured Ron Simmons, so it had all compiled up. So the next time that Ron Simmons wrestled Ahmed Johnson, a little phlegm, sorry. Yeah, that's disgusting. He kind of shot on him in the ring and kind of gave back the receipt. Huh.
No, you know what? It makes me think again. I'm going to give you a little millennial. I guess I'm Gen Z. I'm Gen Z, and I'm really not proud of it, Michael. I'm 1998 is Gen Z, but I'm gonna give you a Gen Z lesson here. Do you know what BDE is?
BDE, not off the top of my head, no.
It stands for big, something we're not allowed to say on this podcast, energy. I assume you can infer what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, Adrian Street, right? You said he's still married to, obviously, right? Straight man.
Miss Linda, yeah.
Miss Linda.
Yeah.
That is BDE, being able to go out there and own that gimmick, right? That was BDE before BDE even existed. And still, you're like, that is what being comfortable with your just being a man is. To me, there's oddly, in a weird oxymoronic way, there's something really manly about an Adrian Street or a Goldust or whoever being able to go out there and, own it, man.
I'll definitely send you some links to some of his YouTube, like the previews for the WWE Network documentary he did, which was called Imagine What I Could Do to You. How much more perfect could that be?
Yeah.
Imagine what I could do to you, from an androgynous man who was straight. And it's funny, like when he spoke about his first match, and he said, I had a 28-inch waist, I was chiseled, and I had this bleached blonde hair. I thought I was going to be the next Nature Boy. And everybody started heckling him. They're like, you're not a man, you're a little boy. And he's like, well, I don't like my men like you. He said it just came to him naturally, so he had to roll with it. And he just kept going and going. So that's why I love that gimmick.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. We'll move over to my number two, excuse me. Again, I think, I know we were talking about this before. I didn't necessarily have this in an order, but I think I am going in some kind of order here. And, I'm on number two. Yeah, we're talking number two. Okay. I'm throwing it over again. We were speaking of the women's division earlier, and I gotta give a shout. Becky Lynch, the man. talk about new school, right? And probably the most current one on my list, or maybe not the most current, but definitely out there. Making a return recently at SummerSlam. We're not going to talk about that because that was god awful. But Becky Lynch, the man, the gimmick, right? We had, you all know the story at this point. She was supposed to turn on Charlotte Flair, be a heel, and that was at SummerSlam as well, actually, if I'm correct. And as probably the biggest Charlotte Flair fan, you know.
Now you sound like me.
It's contagious. The biggest Charlotte Flair fan out here, right? Charlotte Flair, clearly just a heel, born to be a heel, and then you tried to have Becky Lynch turn on Charlotte, and the fans didn't buy it. The fans cheered because, watching essentially watching a heel was being booked as a babyface, getting punched in the face like that. And then we had the infamous, right, Nia Jax broken nose, that wonderful, wonderful, wonderful shot of her with the bloody nose up at the top when we had that weird Survivor Series SmackDown invasion. It's like one of the only Survivor Series that actually worked for me. And then obviously we got the Ronda Charlotte match. That's a different story. But yeah, that was really the birth of the man, the gimmick, the man. And I think the man was such an incredible gimmick because she was like, and I hate to make this comparison, but it's the only thing I can think of. She was this era's version of like a female Stone Cold for us, She had attitude. She was like I think I could say that on this show. She was a badass. She really was. She was just like no other woman on the roster. You know what I mean? And we were kind of clamoring for this, and everybody was already behind Becky at the start, and then this just added to her character. Obviously, we had the rise of the man from there. So many good moments. The main event of WrestleMania, that extremely long WrestleMania with the botched finish. That again. But again, that was not on Becky Lynch, you know what I mean? That was, again, I think it was on the referee, technically, but I'll still think in my head it was on Ronda Rousey. But yeah, and so many other great moments, some not so great moments, but none that were at the fault of Becky Lynch at all, obviously. Becky Lynch took this, ran with it, although she had a similar Daniel Bryan story, right? She was not the one she wasn't tall, blonde, and physically in Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis' ideal picture of what they wanted as their, top woman in the division. She looked different. She had the red hair. She had a different vibe to her, and she, said screw that, and we as fans, right, pushed her to the top, didn't let her turn heel, right, really just got behind her, and so for me, that's why the man is in my top 5 here.
Well, she had the Benoit effect. Like, you went out there, you put on the best damn match every night. The best match every night. And she was the only one of the 4 horsewomen that I believe never held the NXT women's title. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty positive about that. And when they brought her up, I thought that's kind of shaming because she should have had that. She should have had that reign at least one time. But they were so enamored between, Banks and, Charlotte and Bayley.
Speaking of being enamored.
I got to throw it in there. I've always had a thing for Sasha. Candy, if you're listening, I love you, baby. Sorry. But, when it comes down to it, I mean, I always saw her as like the one that kind of pushed aside. So I always wondered if it was a long-term project idea. But then again, with WWE, plans change on the fly. So I just thought they put her up and said, okay, well, you're one of them, you're good, but let's see how good you are. But the fact is, she just kept putting on the best matches with the least amount of mic time. And then when she gets some mic time, she says she's the man, and she just starts dominating. But she earned it, and she built it. It was natural, organic momentum. And yeah, you could argue that she's the female version of a Stone Cold. I can take that. I'll eat that. I'll eat that pie. Definitely, because it's not in a filth way. It's just like you're serving me something. It's good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a food person. That's something we say in the food industry, so I apologize if it came off the wrong way, okay?
You're fine.
But it's like, it's not like you're serving me, liver.
That's my dog's favorite food. When he's in the room, Michael, don't offend him.
Yeah, but someone says like, like I won't eat, I'll eat that pie or I won't eat that liver. That's like, it's a food term, okay? So I apologize if I offended anybody, but it makes sense, like how much you're feeding me the right food. You're giving me dessert. You're not giving me garbage. You're not giving me the scraps. And when you look at the women's division the whole time, it was all Ronda, Ronda, Ronda. Well, they fed it to us we got sick of it. And I've had this discussion with Matt a few times. Her 1 year was arguably very, very forgettable. There was nothing that impressed me with that 1 year. We knew who she was. When she came out, did that stiff point at the sign for WrestleMania, everything. It connected for about 2 months, and then the fans were already turning. And the perfect person was the person you didn't expect, and that was Becky. And I think that finish was such garbage. You're leaving. Do the favors. That's a time-honored tradition. Oh, that leaves the door open for her to come back. Well, it's been, 2 years? And does anybody care from her first run if she comes back?
No, she's busy calling it fake.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, my good friend Mark Tedford said this is his hillbilly soap opera. His hillbilly soap opera, but it's his.
Yeah.
And that's what he wants to watch. And so it's not hers, and it's not for her to say things. I think Shayna Baszler is an upgrade from her way more. In fact, I think Shayna Baszler is a way more talented in-ring performer than Ronda could be. She does not translate. She did not translate. She sold some tickets, and then everybody turned because they realized her drawing power was terrible. I mean, Alexa Bliss eviscerated her on the microphone. And people, they forget when she was going against Alexa made her look really dumb. Really dumb in the ring.
And she injured her too, no? Or was that Nia?
That was Nia.
It's probably both of them. Sorry. Anyways.
But Alexa, and sorry about the swear, Alexa basically came out and just made fun of her to her face. You know, of course, she was way better on the mic, way better on the stick. Alexa is a performer. And while she's not one of the 4 horsewomen, she's sure as heck no Becky Lynch. It just dumbed down Ronda Rousey. So it just put that momentum, like, who's going to take down Ronda? Who's going to take down Ronda? And everybody assumes it was going to be Charlotte. Becky was the perfect person, the perfect time, and the perfect momentum. And it was organic. You've got a great pick there. A great pick.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, Ronda Rousey's a whole nother conversation, too. I have my thoughts about I was never really behind it. It wasn't for me. I was not, she wasn't for me ever, really. And I was on the Becky Lynch train, really. And again, as a Charlotte Flair fan, I was on the Becky Lynch train still, and it was the same thing. I always say, this is the best example I can give, is like, you go and you have to keep with your food analogies. You go and you have a really good meal, right? And whatever. It's some, like, I don't know, nice heavy pasta dish, whatever. You have a really good meal. And then they give you more of it. And then they give you more of it. And then you keep eating it. You ever ate so much fettuccine Alfredo you just wanted to vomit? Like, it feels like that. It's like, I get it. It's good. Stop shoving it down my throat. And now all of a sudden, like, I'm never going to have that food again because I saw what it looked like coming back the other way. You know what I mean? Like, it's just too much of this. And meanwhile, while you're feeding me all this fettuccine Alfredo, I'm looking at a nice arugula salad on the other person's table that looks fresh and good and it's not being shoved down my throat. And it's doing its job damn well, you know. So, like, again, weird food analogy, but I get that food analogies are welcome here.
Liver. It's apple pie versus liver. That's what we do, you
exactly.
know, in the food industry.
And so yeah, she really was, again, as a Daniel Bryan story where we wanted Ronda Rousey, or Charlotte Flair, whoever, right? We wanted Randy Orton versus Batista at WrestleMania. Nah, the fans wanted Daniel Bryan. The fans wanted the fans wanted Becky Lynch, the man. So I really think, again, Becky Lynch took on and was able to take a persona that I don't think, again, makes that route, just like we were talking about before, like, makes that route for other women, like your Rhea Ripley's, to come in, and her gimmick to just be that she's, again, really is just being terrible. It's just a terrible representation on the main roster. But at least on NXT, Rhea Ripley was just able to be a badass. You know? Yeah. And that was her gimmick. But again, the first woman to really do it well, at least in the modern era, we've definitely had badasses in the past, but, the only woman that came to my mind was like a Chyna, but there were definitely, that wasn't her sole role, let's put it that way, just to leave it simply. Becky Lynch trailblazed, really, for a bunch of other women to come and again, feed off that gimmick and have their own sort of, I don't know, badassery later on. So without a doubt, Becky Lynch has to be on my list. So we're throwing it over to you, Michael.
She's over Ronda Rousey, right?
She what over Ronda Rousey?
She's the only person with a win over Ronda Rousey in WWE history, right?
Yeah, I think so. I honestly, again, you said forgettable, and so I really did forget it.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
I wasn't a fan of it, man. I wasn't a fan of it, Michael. I was not, again, as a Charlotte Flair fan, a Becky Lynch fan, whatever, and then you had Ronda Rousey being pushed to the moon for what? Because she could do an arm drag that looked fairly believable.
That was bad.
Sick of it. All right, what's your next pick? Don't get me down that route.
Okay. See, I like this chemistry. All right, the next tag team, the last tag team on my list, the Road Warriors. And I'm going to tell you why. There's been no bigger tag team in history than the Road Warriors. People can argue about any tag team in the world, but there's a reason they call it the Road Warrior Pop. They came out, they lit a place up. The idea came from the Mad Max movie, The Road Warrior. Originally, Animal was the first one, and he dressed like the biker from the Village People. I can't do it with a straight face here, okay? Seriously, that's what he dressed like until Hawk was ready to wrestle. They came up with the gimmicky parts with Dusty Rhodes. They put them together, and instead of going with the goofy stuff of the movie of them being from the future and stuff, they gave them the image of being badass bikers from Chicago. They became the monsters of the Midway. And they had a career that spanned well over 20 years. They had spin-offs when Animal semi-retired and Hawk was tagging with Power Warrior Kensuke Sasaki, I believe it was. They were the first ones in my era when there was 3 nationally recognized promotions, WWF, NWA prior to WCW buyout, and WCW, and the AWA. They were the first ones to win all 3 major promotions tag titles as well as New Japan tag titles. And then with spin-off groups between the two, either Animal tagging with somebody like Heidenreich, which was a joke, and don't ever get me started on that one. Or, they did it all. You heard Iron Man, which was prior to their Oh What a Rush garbage, and Iron Man would hit and the whole place would just pop. They would go crazy. Nobody could sell out a place, minus the Rock and Roll Express as a tag team, like the Road Warriors. And they had the first scaffold match I ever saw, which was it Chi-Town Heat maybe? It was 87, I think.
Can I cut you off for a second and ask you, what is a scaffold match for me and everybody else who has no idea?
You don't know? Okay.
Is it like a fight pit?
No. You basically have 2 ladders on either side of the ring, and there's a scaffold 20 feet in the air above the ring. And the wrestlers have to fight on the scaffold. It
sounds like some TNA stuff.
Well, it's pretty far out there. The matches are never that great. The best match is the Road Warriors versus the Midnight Express, the first scaffold match I ever saw. It's crazy stuff. And the worst one is probably Tommy Dreamer versus Brian Lee when he almost killed him in ECW. That was just insanity. But basically, yeah. So this is a gimmick that they came up with to try to put eyeballs on the pay-per-view demographic, and I think it was 86 or 87. I want to say 87. And but the Road Warriors, they won the match. They're the Road Warriors. And every territory they went into, every major promotion, they won the tag titles. They always would withhold the titles from the Road Warriors because they always say, if we put the belts on you, how do we get them off? Look at you guys. And to have the longevity, and of course they had to change the name to Legion of Doom, but people don't realize that they actually were part of a stable called the Legion of Doom with King Kong Bundy, Jake the Snake Roberts, and Buzz Sawyer when they first started in '83 under Paul Ellering, but that's me being the old man I am. So that wasn't really changing the name. They were just reflecting back so they didn't have to stomp on their own heritage of being the Road Warriors when they came to WWF. Point is, no tag team will ever be associated with wrestling more than the Road Warriors. You can argue the Steiners. No. The Steiners, they had their points. They had some great matches. They're amazing. They're tremendous athletes. Scott Steiner turned into a lunatic. Whatever. But there's only one Road Warriors. And to make the gimmick work and say we're not from the future, we're just badass bikers, the leather, the studs, the face paint, coming down to the ring with a bunch of Hell's Angels around you. No one ever did that. And the crowd just going crazy, special open-air arenas back in Texas and the Carolinas and things like that. All you could hear was the sound of – it was a muted sound of Iron Man, and then all you could hear was the engines of the bikes and just the crowd going crazy. There's no gimmick, no tag team gimmick, period, better than the Road Warriors.
I like that. That was like a nice presentation.
Thanks.
No, I mean, you said Mad Max, right? The movie?
Yes.
I was listening to something about, I don't know, just Vince McMahon's infatuation with Mad Max and why we're having Karrion Kross look the way he does now. And again, another team, like you said, that is, I did not watch a lot of the Road Warrior stuff because it was mostly happened before I was born. However, right, I'm a wrestling fan and I'm a longtime wrestling fan. I'm familiar with the Road Warriors. Paved the way for so many other teams too. All spin-offs, not all nearly as legendary, obviously. But the originals, the OGs for sure. I like that pick for sure. You're not doing a great job at helping me debate with you about some of this stuff because you've got a bunch of really good picks. And I can't debate a lot of stuff that I haven't seen.
I know. Well, you're doing the same thing with me. I mean, because like, how do I debate Becky Lynch? Like, she's really talented, and she was the right place at the right time, and she had the right come up. You know, one thing I will say is the worst thing that we got out of the Road Warriors coming into WWE was it killed Demolition right away. Mm-hmm. And of course, Demolition was Vince's poor man. Road Warriors because they refused to sign with him so many times. So he created his own. And what could have been a great program was destroyed in seconds. It seriously, Demolition lost the tag titles to the Hart Foundation and then just got destroyed by the Road Warriors, Legion of Doom, whatever you want to call them at the time. And then that was it. They disbanded Demolition. We could have had a great program. We could have had, of course, they were so syrupy sweet and gimmicky at the time that, you know, a cage match was supposed to be special, but we could have had a good, brutal kind of match with Demolition versus the Road Warriors instead, and that would have disbanded Demolition. Instead, they just did away with it in like 6 months.
Yeah, that I can tell you I'm not familiar with. I do obviously know of the spin-offs, and Vince McMahon is also famous for his spin-offs when he can't get his hands on a certain talent or whatever, coming up with his own version of it. We haven't seen that in a little while at least, but you've definitely seen things like when they couldn't get the trademark for the broken Matt Hardy, they did Woken Matt Hardy, and obviously your faux New World Order essentially, you know, in back in the day. So that's something I'm going to have to look into, obviously, or research. Like I said, you've made a good case for it, and look into more of the Road Warrior stuff. Because again, I think tag team wrestling, and you know, especially with AEW now, tag team wrestling is bigger than it has been in a long, long time. And so, definitely nice to go back and see some of the OGs, the guys who, like we said, or like I said before, Trailblaze paved the way for so many other teams now. So I love that pick. I think that's a great one. I'm gonna I'll probably give you another one that I doubt you could argue with, and if you could, you're going to have a lot of enemies on your hands considering what the IWC community is just like lately. But my next pick is Lie, Cheat, Steal, Eddie Guerrero.
Oh my gosh.
This one, of course, you know, for me, most of Eddie Guerrero's great stuff was at a time that I was probably either too young to comprehend or not born yet. But obviously starting off in ECW, getting a first big break in ECW, and then in WCW, and then coming over to WWF at the time. Eddie Guerrero, when I was little, my first ever DVD set I got for, you know, back in the day when we had the DVD sets, obviously, now everything wasn't on the network. But my brothers and I would buy each other for Christmas and stuff like that. We'd get each other, you know, wrestling things that our parents would never buy us. And my brother got me Rey Mysterio, like a 3-piece DVD set. And half of the matches on that 3-piece DVD set were Eddie Guerrero. Because those two put on so many classic matches, whether it was WCW or not, whether it was the SummerSlam throwback, obviously, with the custody of, you know, that match had its hiccups, Vicky Guerrero. But,
Yeah.
But the custody of Dominic, all these amazing matches between these two guys, and Eddie Guerrero trailblazed so many things for so many other people later on, and within just the style of wrestling. Obviously, we wouldn't have Sasha Banks maybe if we didn't have Eddie Guerrero, so you can thank Eddie Guerrero for your, you know, weekly Sasha Banks, obviously. And then, you know, things like Lie, Cheat, Steal was cool. You know, this was when we were forming, obviously, the Attitude Era had its a formation in all of this too, but, you know, the real face of what I think of, you know, the guy who made lying, cheating, stealing cool, you think about Eddie Guerrero, and the infamous, one of my favorite finishes to any match of all time, before the roll-up was just, let me say, what they refer to as Pac in AEW-ized, because I can't say that word on this podcast. Before the roll-up was just, I can't think of another word besides that. That's the only word in my head right now. Just overused. Let's go with that. The roll-up at WrestleMania with Kurt Angle, where he slips the shoe off out of the ankle lock and gets the roll-up and wins the... Or that wasn't WrestleMania. Correct me. What's the pay-per-view? No Way Out. Right?
Because WrestleMania was...
the defense of it.
Was that Kurt again, or was that... it was Kurt again.
But I'm thinking about the first championship he ever won, obviously, because no, the first championship he ever won was Brock Lesnar. I don't know what my brain's all scatterbrained. It's late now.
It's okay.
Anyways,
okay.
My point.
Tired old people.
Yeah, exactly. My that finish to that match apparently not that important to me because I can't remember where it even was. But for me, before the roll up was overused, right? I loved that. Slip the shoe off, get the roll up, like. Eddie Guerrero was somebody as an underdog, but like that's not even that underdog doesn't even fit his description because he was way beyond that. He was somebody the fans just organically got behind like that, and he made lying, cheating, stealing cool, and he made the style of wrestling, like the lucha. I might be stretching here, but the luchador style of wrestling beyond just luchadors, you know, beyond the guys who wore the masks, and it was just an incredible high flyer. From the very start, even from when he first started in WWF, and what was the injury he got in that match? I know you know what I'm talking about.
When he first started, when his elbow dislocated, it's one of the most disgusting things you'll ever see. Wow.
But the man finished the match, you know what I mean? Like, and again, came back, obviously he had his struggles outside of the ring, but again, came back stronger, I think, as an inspiration inside and out of the ring. And that, again, his tragic passing, but led to, for me, one of the greatest moments ever in wrestling, period, which was Rey Mysterio winning the Royal Rumble. Was it 2005?
It had 2005 or 6, one of the two.
And I remember the red ring gear.
Yeah.
I remember, like, I still get choked up, teared up, goosebumps whenever I watch that back. Again, obviously, terrible situation. We lost Eddie Guerrero so young, obviously, but even in his death, he still created these amazing moments. And that, to me, just deserves one of the greatest gimmicks of all time. Lie, cheat, steal. You know, with the car, with everything. Just, there will never be another Eddie Guerrero.
See, this is where I get half and half with you. I love Eddie Guerrero. I loved it. I didn't like when he first came in, or I loved it when he first came in, but then when he dislocated his elbow and the whole botch to the Radicals, they had to turn them heel. And then when they made him stereotypical Mexican, I thought they were going to bury him. And that's when I couldn't stand it, when he was like calling everybody SA and everything. I'm like, why are you doing this? Like, you're Eddie Guerrero. You were born in El Paso. I get that you're Mexican, and I get that you're one of the Guerreros, but I was just like so upset with the product at that time.
Well, they did it in WCW too, no, with Latino World Order.
Well, that was supposed to be a standoff. That was just garbage, really. But
you'll have to correct me. I didn't watch that live, obviously.
Okay, so basically, it was supposed to be a standoff to get airtime. So he was forming his own world order, the Latino world order. It was most of the luchadors who didn't win, and he was trying to get Rey Mysterio into it, and then he got in trouble.
Oh, this was the little guys on WCW trying to get more airtime, the cruiserweights.
Yeah, yes, but it was all Latinos. It was really bad. And then Eddie either got another DUI or I don't really remember what happened. I think he got in the car accident. Yeah, he got in the car accident, and so he was trying to get Ray to join the group, then Ray somehow pioneered the group, and then it just kind of quietly disbanded. But a funny story on that, if I could sidebar for a quick second. So I was in my 20s then, and so I got a tattoo on my back of a flying saucer with a bunch of aliens coming out, right? And I was coming home that summer from California to visit my family in Ohio. And my brother he was eating dinner at a late night truck stop, and he found a LWO transfer tattoo, you know, those fake tattoos?
Yeah.
So he put it on his arm, right? And so the next day my dad's waking up and we're sitting there shirtless. And of course my dad, you know, he wasn't a big fan of my tattoos and stuff, you know, it's a long time ago. And then he looks at my brother and he's like, "What the hell do you got that on your arm? I see you got stupid like your brother." and you're not Latin. What the hell's the matter with you?
I didn't know your father was Vince McMahon.
My father, I'll tell you about Gordo some other time. He's 70-something years old, and he has a mustache that operates independent of his lip when he yells. And he starts every sentence with GD and ends every sentence with GD.
I feel like I already know him.
Yeah, he's Captain Curmudgeon. But anyway, the point is, so I didn't like what they were doing in some of his early WWE career. And then when they started Lie, Cheat, and Steal, I thought he's never going to turn out to be anything. Like, not turn out to be anything, but he's going to flounder in the upper mid-card. He's going to be U.S. title, Intercontinental for life kind of thing. And then when I saw that they were starting to move him into working with Kurt Angle and stuff, I'm like, what's going on here? And then when he was starting to get really creative with the fake endings, like hitting someone with the title, then throwing it on somebody else.
Oh, the most, yes. Like, that. How did I forget to mention that? You got me with, yes, one of the most, what's the iconic finishes of all time? And they did it like twice recently. They did it in a Britt Baker Nyla Rose match, obviously with Vicky Guerrero as Nyla Rose's valet and her manager, and then with the some Ricochet match they did recently. But I actually really Cedric Alexander. I remember that match. I remember a Ricochet. Get that, Michael. I remember a Ricochet Cedric Alexander match on Monday Night Raw. I assume why, right? Solely because of the Eddie Guerrero callback. That is how iconic the Lie, Cheat, Steal gimmick was. It had to be on the list.
It is an iconic gimmick. Like I said, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. I thought he was just going to flounder in the upper mid card because he was way too good to be, having programs with Val Venus, and nothing against Val Venus, but just where he was positioned on the card and Gangrel and stuff like that. Now, some couple of side notes on Eddie real quick, and I'll keep this real brief, is the fact that his stable down in AAA, which was Los Gringos Locos, was Art Barr, who invented the Frog Splash, who died ironically earlier than Eddie, and that's why he used it. Madonna's boyfriend, who was perennial enhancement talent Louis Spicolli, until he came back later and was taken seriously. They first made him Rad Radford, then released him, went to ECW, then WCW, then he died of a drug overdose, sadly, before they could use him. But when he went from Tub of Goo, Louis Spicolli, and WWF as enhancement talent to ECW, Louis Spicolli, who the heck has he become? It's just amazing. What he touched when he was around wrestlers, he made them better. Mm-hmm. And a case in point, there was a man, one of the best in the world, who said he had two famous mentors, and his two famous mentors were Eddie Guerrero and Raven, and that's CM Punk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's working IWA Mid-South, working IWA Wildside, and a few other things with Eddie Guerrero. CM Punk said that his career completely changed. He thought he knew wrestling until he worked with him.
Look at you circling back around to one of my other choices. Long-term storytelling, guys. All right, give me your next pick.
So my number 2 is the man, the myth, the legend, the only person that they said could beat up Haku that wasn't Andre the Giant. The man that scared more people, who could do anything he wanted and was an oxymoronic walking contradiction, and that is the man, Frank Goodish, Bruiser Brody. You believed when he put on those furry boots and said huss and grabbed his palm and grabbed his chain and walked to the ring that he was the craziest human being in the world. Bruiser Brody, if you ever read his book, was the smartest man in the world. He is the king of burning a territory. He did what he wanted to do. He went into a place. He said, this is what I want to get paid. They gave it to him. He gave them a show, but then he would do what he wanted. He would grab his chain, swing it, walk into the crowd, and the crowd would split. He would part the Red Seas of people because they believed he was going to hurt them, and he didn't care if he did. And to my knowledge, he never hurt anybody. The chain never hit because they believed he was a psychopath, a madman, a crazy man. But what people don't know is that when he went into a territory, he would also take a day job as a sports reporter for a newspaper because he had a degree in journalism. Bruiser Brody was smart. But if he didn't get what he wanted, he would basically screw them at the end of a match and walk out of the territory. And one of the most infamous things is that in the territory, if Andre came through, you wouldn't slam him. Not only did Bruiser do it, he did it with one arm and then walked out after his payday. So, Bruiser Brody to me is my number 2 because I watched matches of him when I was a kid and I was scared. I was 10 years old, glued to a little black and white television. Hey, we were poor, we were kids, and it was 85, come on. And I was just watching him swing that chain and go into the crowd, and I'm like, he's going to kill somebody. I really thought he was going to kill somebody. I had never seen anybody that dedicated. And then to realize that, okay, that's what I'm doing in Dallas at night, but I'm going to go 5 miles over in Fort Worth and do my sports column during the day. We were all the suckers. We were the idiots because he made his gimmick, but he didn't live it. He just lived it when he turned the light switch on. That's insane to me. And to be that character-driven, that they talk about, what is that style of acting that what Heath Ledger died of.
Method acting.
Method acting, yeah. He was the first original method actor I could think of, but it was only with a light switch. And his ex-wife would tell you, like, yeah, he was a great father, and, you know, his book is interesting, and I highly recommend his book because I have a hard time reading. I love to read, but I have to read, like, things 5 times before I digest it, whereas his book is all written in quotes, which is really interesting, so it's very easy to digest. But when you listen to everything, and then his sad, tragic death, because he did what he wanted to, and then he got into Puerto Rico, and they basically let him get knifed, and then they wouldn't let an ambulance through, and that's some sad stuff. And Tony Atlas had to flee for his life. Dutch Mantell was there, and they talk about it like there's no way an ambulance couldn't make it to the arena within an hour or something like that, but yet it's mandatory for any kind of wrestling to have an ambulance on call. With that being said, he was part method actor, part genius. I don't know anybody who was what Bruiser Brody was to wrestling. When he first started, you have The Undertaker only because a man talked The Undertaker into coming back after Bruiser Brody beat him up in the ring.
Yeah.
He beat the snot out of him, you know? I mean, it's just, he was that badass. And have you ever seen the footage of Bruiser Brody versus Luger in a cage?
I have not seen that one, no.
Florida Championship Wrestling. So this is back 86. So Luger was getting the call up to Jim Crockett Promotions to be on the national stage on the NWA in the 6 p.m. time slot on Saturdays on WTBS. Yes, I know all this. And I'm sorry, I'm a goofball. And
no, we love it.
Luger was Luger was a hot shot in Florida, but he'd only been in the business for 7 months. And he knew he was getting the call up, so he was running his mouth off. And he had a cage match where he was supposed to win over Brody. And he ran his mouth, I'm going to be this big star, da-da-da. And then he, I guess, said something to Brody along the lines of, maybe I'll put in a good word for you. Well, the reason Brody didn't work there is because people were afraid of him, and if he wanted to be there, he would. So it's just one of those things. But Brody got mad. So they have a match, and they're in the cage. And Brody stops selling Luger and then starts slapping him around, and Luger ran out of the cage. The babyface ran out of the cage. Well, he climbed over the top and left.
Yeah, I know. I will have to check that out. I have seen some of his stuff, obviously, and I've seen the chain walk, and you're right, like, somebody who lived the gimmick when he was there, but also, you know, Frank Goodish, who supposedly was an amazing father, like a great guy, a great husband, from all reports, obviously, and obviously the tragic death of Bruiser Brody or Frank Goodish in Puerto Rico, which I am familiar with, or whatever, of the story too. I love the pick. I think it's we will never have, again, you'll never have somebody like a Bruiser Brody again, because it can't happen in a 2021 scenario now. Again, maybe, who knows? CM Punk's back in wrestling, Michael, so I got nothing anymore. But, like, we'll never have anything like a Bruiser Brody, probably, and obviously, like you said, a smart guy, Frank Goodish, who really just, you know, it frustrated other people, again, like your Jose Gonzalez, and the whole situation with the wrestling promotion in Puerto Rico too. But somebody who, again, as if you're around my age and a fan of modern wrestling and you don't know who Bruiser Brody is, definitely somebody to go look at as a man who is able to. You hear a lot about problems with wrestlers who have problems separating kind of the real from the fake when they get so invested in their characters like that, and you know, like, I hate to use the example, and someone who we should probably make an honorable mention to, hopefully he's not your last pick, but a Brian Pillman, you know, I always want to say Brian Pillman Jr. But Brian Pillman, right, who's probably got one of the great, I can't believe he's not on my list, so and if he's not on yours, we definitely have to mention him too. Somebody whose lines really got blurred, you know what I mean? Bruiser Brody was somebody who was able to cut the tie there. When he was out there, he was Bruiser Brody. When he was home, he was a Frank Goodish. So somebody who again, like, we're just never going to see another Bruiser Brody ever again. And obviously the tragic death is just something that clearly could have been prevented, never needed to happen. We all know the story at this point. If you don't know the story, there's a great Dark Side of the Ring episode on it. But, you know, we're never going to see some kind of Abdullah the Butcher, Bruiser Brody, at least on national television. Obviously, they still have some crazy extreme matches like death matches and stuff like that. But there is nobody ever in professional wrestling who will, you know, elicit the fear in a crowd like Bruiser Brody did.
Not a human being alive. I mean, you can talk about when I just look back to The Undertaker coming out and the crowd's chilled. No, you're saying the crowd's chilled. People ran from Bruiser Brody, okay? There's a difference. By the way, Brody slapped around The Undertaker. It's like such a different level. But definitely, I would love to do a show with you on Brian Pillman. And I don't know why he didn't make either one of our lists, because the whole loose cannon thing and what he did and the way he duped the crowd, we definitely have to have a talk about that one.
Yeah, no, Brian Pillman for sure. And obviously, like I said, that's another one. If you are like me and someone who obviously wasn't alive at a lot of these times or was too young to comprehend what television was or whatever, there is there's a great Dark Side of the Ring, and I think they're very tasteful. If you've heard my podcast ever before, I've mentioned it. I think they do it in a very tasteful way where it's, again, it's dramatic, obviously, because it's television, but they manage to tell the story without. Let me put it this way. Brian Pillman Jr. in AEW got even more over than he already was after the documentary came out, because they do a very good job of telling a story, even like your Chris Benoit's, whatever, in a very, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess tasteful is the only word I can think of.
Tasteful,
yeah, diplomat, like they just do a good job of it's not like about soiling any name or clickbait or anything like that. It's a very well told story, television. You know, they do a really good job of documenting it in a way that doesn't speak down upon anybody that they're doing it on. So I really recommend that if you're somebody who, again, when I say Brian Pillman Jr. or Brian Pillman doesn't know who I'm talking about when I say Brian Pillman, or isn't super familiar, or you don't know who Bruiser Brody is. There's such I'd spend 40 minutes out of your day, they do such a good job of summarizing, you know, the early life and obviously what happened and whatever, if there's some tragedy, which obviously these two men had to go through. But to familiarize yourself, because again, like we said, there will never be another Bruiser Brody, so you're never going to get to see anything like that again. And then you'll never have a situation like a Brian Pillman again. I don't know how we got from Brian Pillman to... I don't know how we got from Bruiser Brody to Brian Pillman. I was thinking about him when I was talking about him, and I was like, God, if she says Pillman... That's like I thought about that. I had to make a mental note, because we both clicked on that. And, like, here's the thing, folks, if I may, for a second, because I don't like to cut you off, Mimi. I respect you. Brian Pillman started out as a high flyer. Okay, first of all, the guy beat cancer when he was like a kid. He had throat cancer as a kid. Oh my, yes, the story is so sad when you hear, but that's why he talked the way he talked.
Yeah, and so this guy, he played for the Cincinnati Bengals, and then he was like this high flyer, and as a kid I was like, screw this guy, you know? But he was solid in the ring. He was solid as just, in the 80s, if you're a high flyer, it was different. You were a drop kick and a high crossbody off the top rope kind of guy, and you always lost. And then he evolved his character, and he got so good he became one of the Horsemen, but he changed and he became psychotic. And he created this character, but he would not tell people if he was faking or if he was doing the real thing. And there was only a handful of people who knew what he was doing. And he convinced Eric Bischoff to release him because the internet community was getting, well, the dirt sheets. It was before the internet. The internet was in its infancy. I wasn't even on the internet then. It was like 96. I was barely on the internet. And so, but dirt sheets were everywhere, and people knew kind of like what was happening with pre-taped stuff. And so he convinced Eric Bischoff, release me, and then I'll come back as a guy who doesn't work here. It was like a pre-NWO, NWO angle. And the sad part is, he went to ECW, and for all of you who want to see how weird and crazy he took this character to a new extreme, just Google Brian Pillman's ECW debut. And it's 12 minutes of, wow, that guy is, you don't know if he's crazy or he's not. And then instead of coming back, he signed with WWF because that was his plan the whole time, but he got in an accident. Well, I'm not going to go into that. But what I am going to go into is the reason that Chris Benoit was in his situation and ended up with woman who ended up becoming Nancy's wife is because that whole position was supposed to be slated for Brian Pillman.
Yeah, and just a man who could cut a promo like nobody else ever. Again, because you didn't... this was the time, obviously, where people were starting to learn about what was going on backstage and whatever else. And so a guy who cut a promo like nobody else, right, where you... The best wrestling is the stuff where it's like, again, for all of you who popped for some... First of all, I'm happy for you if you did, by the way. But for all of you that popped at Roman Reigns saying something about Nikki Bella... I forget what it was on SmackDown. I wasn't paying attention. But, right, the reason why that stuff should hit, that whole, Paul Heyman shoot, work, promo crap that we hear, all the time now. Back then, it wasn't so overused like it is today. But that's why it hits so hard, because it's the best kind of pro wrestling is real, and with Brian Pillman Jr., we didn't know what was real and what was fake. You know what, Michael? Brian Pillman is my pick. I'm calling it now. This was my number 4. Forget it. I'll give you my other honorable mention, by the way, was the Demon. But Brian Pillman 110% surpasses anything, as New Japan or not, and all this other amazing stuff. The debut against Kota Ibushi and all this. It's still Brian Pillman Jr. The gimmick. The man lived the gimmick like no one else. And so I'm bumping the Demon off my list, and I'm putting Brian Pillman on my top 5 gimmicks of all time.
Well, we could sidebar to the Demon for a second, because I'm a huge fan of Finn Balor. And my thing is, like, his ring work speaks for himself. And for them to make him the first Universal Champion, of course they were punishing Roman, but there were so many people other than him that they could have put that belt on. So they knew what they had. That was Triple H's influences, and now that Triple H is basically being neutered and taken out of everything, excuse me, it still speaks on its own that he was the first Universal Champion. Mm-hmm. And to use the Demon gimmick, I went back and I saw like his old gimmicks in Japan when he was using the Demon as like Sweeney Todd, and he did a Marilyn Manson one, and he did a bunch of different versions of the Demon, which I love. But the man is so super talented, he makes it work. Now, I don't think he makes it work bipolarly like The Fiend does with Bray Wyatt. But, I mean, Finn Balor's so incredibly talented, he doesn't need the Demon. That's what makes it special. He's just that damn good that he doesn't need that. So when you pour a little hot sauce on the chicken, it's sizzling. It's sizzling, and it's going to be even spicier. You've got a great pick there too, but this is a point where I will disagree with you. I love the gimmick. I love the wrestler. Probably he was my favorite active wrestler after CM Punk retired. But brass tacks and baseball bats, he's so talented. He doesn't need that gimmick. It works for him. He doesn't need it. And
I'll say, and I understand that the reason why he did do it. I don't know if you know the origins, or but if for anybody who doesn't, and again, I'm not. I was just talking about this on the AEW review. I am no encyclopedia. I really don't. I know probably way more than I should, but I don't know everything. But I do know, obviously, what the Finn Balor had been wrestling for about 6 years in Japan as a babyface, white meat babyface, nothing special, and the reason the body paint started to happen, obviously, was they asked him, do you want to turn heel? And so he decided he was going to do everything he could to do the exact opposite from what he was a babyface. So he's a white meat babyface. He starts to paint his body. and he was thinking maybe I'll wear a bodysuit, something like that, but you already had Jushin Thunder Liger in New Japan at that point. So he starts with the body paint. And so I disagree. I think he did need it at that time. And it really, catapulted him with that match against Kota Ibushi. And then, right, I think the best part about the Demon, or one of the best parts, is supply and demand, right? Finn Balor, I guarantee you every wrestling promoter ever wants the Demon, right? I guarantee you Vince McMahon would send the Demon out every other week. I guarantee the Demon could be your quarterly invitational wild card thing from brand to brand invitational crap. Like, that is how much people would use the Demon, but Finn Balor himself holds back. He hasn't, when's the last time we saw the Demon? I would say there have definitely been times where it didn't need it. Really didn't need it, right? But, for example, I don't even think the debut of it on NXT with Kenta, I don't remember what his name was in NXT, but, with Kenta, what was it?
Hideo Itami.
Hideo Itami, right. Okay, yes, with Kenta. We're just going to call him Kenta because that's his name.
Yeah, Kenta.
With Kenta, in the tag team match against the Ascension, I don't think that was necessarily... You didn't need it because he was Finn Balor. He was a big enough, like you said, he was a big enough name for what he was. But I think there was a point in his career he definitely did need it. And again, he uses it so well, at least he does, as a special attraction where it's so exciting. Like, I thought, a lot of people thought he was going to go against Karrion Kross recently as the Demon. I said, please don't. Don't you dare use the Demon for Karrion Kross. And then people were like, Karrion Kross is going to beat him as the Demon. I was like, don't. I swear to God, I'm never watching this program NXT again if they put over Karrion Kross, who's now your, Road Warriors knockoff on Monday Night Raw, over the Demon for what?
For all you throwback listeners from the old Continental days, he's Lord Humongous, which was Sid Vicious, by the way. You can thank me later.
I do know the name Sid Vicious, actually. But with all that, I know, instead of me bragging about the weird things that I know, yes, I think the Demon definitely deserves to be somewhere in the top gimmicks of all time, just because, like you said, I don't think it means to be a bipolar character. I think he does, and I've read interviews from him in the past, too, where he talks about it's like this other representation of himself where he tries to tap into all that. And you can believe that, right? Where he taps into all this stuff or whatever in him that is not in his normal Finn Balor smiley, wonderful self, right? Especially back in his first run in WWE on the main roster. But he taps into all of that other darker stuff. You can really believe that, that's something a guy does. Again, you're crazy. You have something wrong with you for sure. But, it doesn't... It's not supernatural like The Fiend. I don't ever want any, and I know you didn't mean it like this too, but The Fiend and the Demon to me are in two totally different categories. On this podcast, we're talking about the list of the greatest 5 gimmicks ever. In that list, we'd be talking about the worst gimmicks ever, I think. The Demon is without a doubt, and the face paint is so cool, and the body paint is so ridiculously awesome. The art itself is so incredible.
I really wish I had Finn Balor's abs.
We all do.
At one point, I had a 4-pack. I don't want to brag.
I wish I had AJ Styles' hair, but I don't. I would still, if anybody knows, would love to know what he does, what shampoo and conditioner he uses, because the man has better hair than any woman I've ever met, besides my fiance, of course. But otherwise...
It has luster and shine.
Yeah,
We're cutting a shampoo commercial. It has luster and shine. When you flip your hair, people will... know the aroma.
It's phenomenal.
Yes. We always thought back in the day, and you're going to love this. I'm sorry, folks. This is a little sidebar, but when
First
Paul
sidebar.
Roma was when Rick Martel became the model, WWF started selling his cologne, Arrogance. Okay, and so we thought Paul Roma should go against him with Paul's Aroma. I'm sorry, and thank you, anybody who's older and listened to me. Thank you. I apologize.
Well, what were we on number 1? We got one more each left?
It's my number 1, so I'm going to give you controversial. Are you ready?
Uh-oh.
It's not controversial so much as, a lot of people are going to say, if they're newer listeners, they're not going to understand. But this is new versus old a little bit, so I'm going to give it to you. The one and only true king of wrestling, Jerry Lawler. And I'm going to give you the reason why. Jerry Lawler has wrestled everyone that you knew from the past. Your Hulk Hogan's, your Andre the Giants, your Ric Flairs, your Tully Blanchards, Arn Andersons, everybody. anybody who is anybody that influenced anybody who laces up their boots now and sets foot in the ring has set foot against Jerry the King Lawler.
I mean, even The Miz has.
Don't even get me started in that waste of a human being.
Well, just before, I don't mean to cut you off, help us, again, someone like myself understand before you go on more. When we're talking about Jerry the King Lawler, when I think of Lawler, right, I think of terrible Lawler, misogynistic announcer Lawler. We're talking about old Jerry Lawler, obviously. We're not talking about commentary Lawler.
No, definitely. We're talking about Continental Wrestling, USWA. Jerry the King Lawler wrestled from the mid-70s up through the 80s. He was truly the king of wrestling. So he dubbed himself that, and anybody who was anybody had to go through Memphis. Before there was the Ohio Valley Wrestling, which was the first feeder, and Heartland Valley Wrestling and Florida Championship Wrestling, which eventually bled into NXT. It was all coming through Memphis, which was originally the USWA in the 90s, but before that, Continental, and I won't bore you with everything. Lawler wrestled everybody, and everybody wrestled and came through Memphis. Memphis was, before Vince McMahon Jr.'s national expansion, the true kingdom of wrestling. If you don't believe me, you can watch the movie Man on the Moon, and no, I'm not just marking out for the movie. The fact is, I was watching David Letterman in 1984 when Andy Kaufman got slapped by Jerry Lawler. That was national exposure. Now, the only people who got exposure back then, sorry, I trip over my own tongue sometimes, the only people who got exposure like that, Andre the Giant and a young Hulk Hogan, because he was doing the Rocky movie and some stuff on A-Team. But we're talking 84. This is like right when the expansion happened. So when people would talk about wrestling, they talk about wrestling. They wouldn't talk about the NWA or anything else. It all came out of Memphis. It was all Memphis. So the man decreed himself the king of wrestling. And if you were the best of the best, you had to go through him. It didn't matter what territory or what wrestling promotion you came from. You had to wrestle Jerry the King Lawler. And he owned it, and he lived it, and he loved it. But he knew by the time he got to WWE that his career was winding up. He was actually younger than me. I think he was like 41 or 42. But he just decided to do a little minor in-ring stuff with Bret Hart and then just be a commentator because they were funding him to keep the USWA alive as a feeder system for Vince. And it just all kind of worked out for him. Retire and then just do your stuff in your hometown and just be a commentator. Okay, be humble. This man's feeding you now. And so that's what he did. But the fact is, he wrestled everybody. And if you look at his old matches, there's nobody that could do what the King did. He had a match. He was so over in Memphis, Tennessee, and I know this because I'm standing in Memphis, Tennessee right now, that he had riots in his stadium so bad that they had to have the police haul off 20 or 30 people. He had his head shaved as the babyface. He lost, I think, Austin Idol, who was the guy tapped to be Hogan if Hogan wouldn't have been Hogan. It had not come to the WWF from the AWA. He got his head shaved in a cage, and they did it in a cage because people came over the barriers and crowded the cage and tried to rip it apart to save Jerry the King Lawler. Nobody could get heat like Lawler. If you don't believe me, watch the movie Memphis Heat and see. It's a documentary and it's great. You can find it on Amazon Prime. You probably have to pay $5 for it, but the point is he was the true king of getting heat. He was the true king of wrestling, and he did more for pro wrestling prior to the expansion than any person in the United States, period. He lived the gimmick. He was the king.
Yeah, I can tell you I was not expecting that pick. I was not expecting that. But it's a you know what? Let me put it this way. It's an educational pick for me. Because again, like I said, this is where we're talking about new school, old school. When I think about Jerry Lawler, even I have to go back in time. I think about, gross Jerry Lawler on commentary. I haven't seen a lot of Jerry Lawler in the ring, obviously, because most of the time he wrestled, it was before my time. And personally, you don't hear a lot to go back and watch Jerry Lawler wrestling. You know what I mean? It's just not. He's not somebody who people say, well, you got to go back and watch this match or you got to go back and watch that match. But like you said, it sounds like because it was a little bit more, not necessarily under the radar, but just stuff you're not going to find necessarily on a WWE documentary.
It's kind of insane. Like, you look at the movie Man on the Moon, okay? And even up to when they made that movie, the documentary of Andy Kaufman's life, people did not realize, especially in the South, that whole thing was scripted. I hate to use that term, but it was scripted. They still believe to this day that Jerry Lawler and Andy Kaufman hated each other. And Jim Carrey spoke about it. He's like, yeah, people still to this day. That, to me, is not only a gimmick, they gave you the longest running story angle in history.
If Hangman Page doesn't return back to AEW soon, we might have another rival for that. Sorry, just throwing that out there. Anyways, no, I love that pick. I'm gonna. We are obviously a great conversation. We are going for it today. I'm gonna give you my last pick as well, for time purposes. And this one, I don't think there's a lot of people out there that are gonna argue with me. The Three Faces of Foley is my number one gimmick, with obviously we had Dude Love, Cactus Jack, and Mankind. I was going to just say Mankind, but when I think about, the impact of Dude Love and Cactus Jack as well, I have to include all of them. Obviously, with the match against Sting in WCW, all the way back, again, that's something before my time, but I'm obviously familiar with the 1992 at Beach Blast. And then got to talk about, obviously, the match, The Undertaker, the Hell in a Cell, and then we have the first ever Buried Alive match, and then, Mick Foley, just as himself, goes so beyond what he's done just on WCW and obviously WWF, and I wasn't familiar with that for the longest time, but obviously with the big title win, the quote-unquote spoiler that actually ended up, being a giant ratings boost in the Monday Night Wars, but beyond that, like, death matches. This man is absurd and has done some of the craziest stuff in wrestling ever. And if not necessarily done some of the craziest stuff, which he has, he's innovated a lot of the craziest stuff. And when you think hardcore wrestling, you think Mick Foley. But not only that, I mean, the guy could just go, period. He talk about somebody in three different versions of himself, first of all, who lived each gimmick, right? There's someone who did not play wrestler. He was Cactus Jack. He was Mankind. He was Dude Loved. Like, just one of the most committed men to their craft that there ever will be, right? Obviously, there was more than just there was Commissioner Foley later on Monday Night Raw and all that stuff. I'm not talking about that, though. He was still good in his role, as good as you can be in a WWE Authority role. But I mean, some of the matches and some of the moments he's created, and I hate to use that term because it's, again, so overused, but will forever live on in our memories, and there's no one better to me, and there's nobody who lives a gimmick better, and three of them, by the way, and has created more moments in each of these gimmicks than a Mick Foley and the Three Faces of Foley, so it had to be my number one without a doubt.
Well, it's an interesting pick, and here's my thing with Mick Foley, okay? So I first got introduced to him on Global in the 90s, and he was Cactus Jack. Prior to that, I guess he was doing Cactus Jack Manson, but I loved it, okay? And at first I was like, okay, it's another wild man gimmick, but his antics and that elbow, he was starting the elbow then, and I was like, that's a little risque for, Global wasn't a big territory, so I was like, what the heck, And then he gets called up to WCW, and he's still Cactus Jack, which I hate that renaming of people, And so I'm like, oh, awesome, And they kind of used him as mid-card fodder at first, and then started building his momentum and going against Sting, and I'm like, I love this guy. I loved him, And I just couldn't keep my eyes off. And so I started doing the bang bang just as a joke around the house. My dad's like, GD, what's wrong with you, GD? And I'm like, I'm just doing Cactus Jack. So I bought a wrestling magazine. And I was reading it, and I got to the part of Cactus Jack, and I left it on the stove. And my dad had picked the last couple of tomatoes that were dying in his garden. And he left them in this back little room foyer area before you go into the kitchen. And there was a bunch of fruit flies, and he took the wrestling magazine and he slaughtered the fruit flies with Cactus Jack's face. I'll never forget this. And I was like, Dad, that's Cactus Jack. He's like, well, he's Cactus Fly now. And so it stuck out in my head. I'm like, I wonder what's ever going to happen to him. And then he disappeared off the map for a long time. Then I heard he was in ECW, but we didn't have it in our market, so I didn't know. And then I saw him getting called up to WWF at the time as Mankind, and I was like, oh, they were so good about rebranding and re-idealizing people. And I thought, okay, they're not going to do anything with them. And then I saw what they did with them. With the music in the front, music in the back. The interviews. Everything. When he was like Goldust's lackey, when he would just lay his head on Goldust's lap, stuff like that. And I was like, they might have something on their hands. And then the internet started to work. This was about 96, and of course it was all dial-up, but we started getting on bulletin boards and flash sites and all kinds of stuff like that. It's like when McIntyre gave us that shout out talking about E-Feds, I used to be an E-Fed. I'm that old, Mm-hmm. And so I was just watching him, and I remember Vince McMahon, somebody asked him in an interview, what do you think of Mick Foley? And he said, a lot of people like Mick Foley will never get their due, but in Mick's case, I think he will. I thought, you can't be serious. So then they started some reality stuff before they went full on Attitude. They did it with Patriot Del Wilkes when they did an interview with him without the mask on, and he's just Del Wilkes, and they talk about his past, and they started showing stuff from like All Japan and things like that. And I'm like, this isn't WWE. Why do they do this? And then they did a spotlight on Mick Foley, and they talked about Dude Love. Next thing you know, Dude Love's on there. I'm like, okay, I'm buying into this. Okay. And they just kept it progressing. And I love the fact that he whipped Triple H's ass as the Three Faces of Foley. I loved it because it was Triple H's. It was right before the golden shovel moment. So I have no problem with your pick. It's just weird because I saw all those incantations minus the Dude Love coming up, and I loved it. But for me, always I was like looking at him, and when he started losing the Mankind aura, becoming Mick Foley and Mankind, I was like, where's Cactus Jack? I just want Cactus Jack. And then when he showed him, he's like, I'm back, and seeing Triple H in the ring, I was like, oh yeah, but he better not lose tonight. And he didn't. That was the best moment of Mick Foley's career, in my opinion.
Funny, I do love those matches, and I have went back and watched those matches too, and some of the crazy stuff they did. And Mick Foley was such a was so good at the bait. I don't want to call it the bait and switch, but I don't know another term for it, and I'm sure there is a term for it, but I'm not a professional wrestler, and that's why I don't know the term for it. But where he, I'm thinking about the match with Triple H, and it was a Hell in a Cell, and they're on top of the cell, and I don't even remember what maybe you'll remember and refresh my memory, but they were doing something, and they and in order to distract for the fact that they were doing it, they lit the plywood on fire. You know what I'm talking about? Am I
vague, very vague?
It was one of those matches, but essentially he would do one thing or have the other person do one thing, so you wouldn't see the actual thing coming. And it's such a lost art in hardcore wrestling, period, in deathmatch wrestling and whatever. And I am not versed in deathmatch wrestling by any means, but
I hate that stuff. Yeah.
We could have a conversation about that because there's an argument to be made there. But he was so good at the art of it rather than just we see Mick Foley and you think, oh, the guy got thrown off the cage and then got thrown through the cage and whatever else and nearly evaded death and whatever. Yes, I'm saying it so casually. All incredible stuff, right? But my point being is that he wasn't just a hardcore wrestler. He knew the art of it and how to do the little things, the things that the guys who are just smashing things against each other don't think about. It's how do you tell a story with the weapons rather than just using weapons? How do you get a thing like Sacco over, right? And how do you, this crazy, creepy guy, but then you're also managed to be one of the most beloved wrestlers all at the same time. And again, I go back to those interviews. Some of the most iconic things of all time, like that, he was so good at what he did, just like we were talking about before, I was saying before, like Brian Pillman, right? You couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't, and that's to me what is truly, we were talking about what defines the best gimmicks, longevity, whatever, right? To me, it's the believability of it. How can I get emotionally invested in whatever you're showing me? Because again, Nikki Ash right now, again, it's low-hanging fruit, but like, how do I get invested in somebody who loses and then says that they're going to try, I don't know even what's going on there. You can't invest in a loser like that. But
it's garbage, yeah.
Mick Foley was a loser for a while in his career, right?
Tommy Dreamer.
Tommy Dreamer is the guy, again, how many baby faces out there that the crowd will literally go and help the man up during a match? Again, obviously different times, ECW is a different thing too, but just like how emotionally invested can you get into this gimmick? And I think Mick Foley and all the phases of Foley, right? Faces of Foley deserves like recognition for being someone who you could probably get the most emotionally invested in so many different ways, whether it was cheering for him, booing him, wondering if this man is going to murder everybody in the audience. Like, it just, like you said with Bruiser Brody, right? Like, people were terrified of the man. People didn't know what the hell was going on with Mick Foley, or Mankind or whatever at the time. Just something, again, we'll never see believability-wise ever again, but it's what makes a gimmick great. And I think it's a good wraparound, obviously, as we close down here, of just what makes a gimmick great to me. And I'll ask you the same question, is believability. Can I get emotionally invested in this?
Well, absolutely. And like I said, I mean, I was a kid and watching Bruiser Brody with the chain. I'm going, I don't want to, I want to see him live, but can we sit in the stands?
Mm-hmm.
That's emotionally invested. Three Faces of Foley. He got us in a different way. Of course, his in-ring was one thing, but his promos and everything else, and doing the schizophrenic kind of three different person, or the multiple NPD, I should say. We know it wasn't real, but we loved it. That's a great gimmick.
Yeah.
That's not mailing it home. That's showing up on the doorstep to surprise mama. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. And, I look at, like, okay, the Rock and Roll Express and the Road Warriors on my list, like, that's tag team wrestling, but they took it to different heights and different perspectives and different directions, which is amazing. And to have a tag team sell out something is just, it's a whole new level that Vince McMahon won't accept today, because he believes the tag team should be two single stars that are going to happen in the future. And he needs to probably just retire or just accept he has Alzheimer's or something like that, because he's not doing himself any favors right now with his direction and his releases. But with everything being said, tag team wrestling should still be alive, and I think that the people I picked are definitely gimmick-heavy icons. I think everybody we picked today are gimmick-heavy icons. It's like John Cena's John Cena. He was Dr. Thuganomics, and then he became, Vanilla. And that's what people turn on him. CM Punk. Well, CM Punk is different, because his gimmick is he's a punk. And that's why you're supposed to hate him. Because no matter what he'll tell you, the way he thinks and what he likes and what he does and the way he wants it, the way he wants to do things. I buy him as a gimmick as a whole. I look at, I don't know, it's a reason that Ring of Honor has a hard time after the AEW start and they lost so many stars, is because you don't have characters besides maybe Dalton Castle, who's an homage to Adrian Street and a few other people. You don't have anything. They have Brody King, which is just like Brody Lee, and he's good, just weird, different, similar name, similar look, similar style, but you don't have that much that you can sink your teeth into, and that's the problem with wrestling today. And that was the problem with the gimmicks and everything that we basically base the show on. We look at your ethnicity is a gimmick, which is racism in a form. And we look at, so you have the Celtic Warrior. Does that not mean he doesn't like to listen to hip-hop and doesn't want to have goofy bagpipes playing him into the ring? Like, why do we have to do that? That doesn't tune me up. And of course, his moveset to me is like boring, is god-awful, but yet they'll put world titles on him over and over again. But that's just me going on a diatribe. The point is, where do we sink our teeth into the food? We're not. And so that lost art is out there, and we're trying to bring it back, but you have to do it in baby steps. And they're not doing it right. Karrion Kross is the first example. And then you have somebody like Big E. They don't know what the heck to do with him. Is he a face? Is he a heel? He's got goofy stuff on. He's not part of the New Day, but he dresses like a goofball, and he's supposed to be a face, but he turns off more people than he tunes in. Then you have The Miz. The guy shouldn't have ever stepped in a ring to begin with. He lives his gimmick because his gimmick is his life, and he should have never been a wrestler, let alone a champion, let alone winning. It's sad. So if we're going to reestablish characters as gimmicks, we got to figure out where to create this gimmick and where to create a good character. And if you're going to fire all these people who are indie darlings, I got a new thing for you, Vince. It's called learning, because they like them. That's why they were tuning in, and they can perform. And all these people that you're bringing up, they're not that good.
See,
sorry.
No, you're fine now. Of course, we're in like hour 2 is when you start bringing up stuff that I can debate you about the New Day. I want to sit down and debate the New Day because I believe the New Day is one of the greatest tag teams of all time. And you're not doing it, but I can feel the audible groan anyways. Or the Miz. I wouldn't consider myself a Miz apologist. But I think the Miz has value, and I think the Miz has got a story too. As to I don't know how much you know about the Miz's story as into professional wrestling outside of just the reality show thing, but his actual journey is interesting. These are things that I would love to. I'm sure we would talk for 4 hours about it, and that's something to debate about. Because I think the Miz has value. I think Big E is one of the most charismatic people they've ever had in WWE. They're just stupid. I don't think any of the fault very, very rarely falls on the wrestler. I think it's 9 times out of 10, at least in WWE creative, and that's the cool part about, again, not to go on another diatribe as we close up here, but just AEW is, at least for the most part, if something doesn't hit, it's not because creative's booking some crap or whatever. It's probably because whatever the wrestler came up with isn't hitting in it, and it's on the wrestler. It's not necessarily on the company. It's about the wrestler, and I think it's such an interesting thing that we're just not used to nowadays, obviously, because we always just blame creative. Why did Becky Lynch come out and squash Bianca Belair? It's creative's fault. You know what I mean? Just funny, interesting now, new topics or whatever, new things to think about, obviously, the way AEW works here, too. And, again, I'll debate with you up and down 95 about the New Day, Michael, because I'm a New Day stan. I think somehow they're still going. And the thing at WrestleMania was awful, but there's been definitely a lot of awful stuff, but I just want to point out there's been a lot of awful stuff with almost every gimmick ever out there too. But I almost put the New Day on my list, but I figured I'd save you the heart attack.
No, that's fine. I look forward to the debate. I don't have a problem with them. I have a problem with the way they present Big E. And the fact is, basically, the second that Keith Lee got called up, Big E was like dead in the water because Keith Lee is the guy they always wanted the whole time. And then he gets sick, and so they pushed Big E, but they didn't know what to do with him, and they made a farce out of who he was. And then Keith Lee comes back overweight, so they bury him, so they don't know what to do with both of them.
They sent Keith Lee back to developmental. You remember that? Sorry to cut you off. They said that we don't like the way that you wrestle. You're a big guy. You need to wrestle like the way a big guy wrestles, so they send him back to developmental.
Nick Khan's doing such a great job. Just drive those people over to the other channel, don't you? That's exactly what's happening. Well, I hate to cut you off, Michael, but we're going to go on a whole nother diatribe right now, and we'll save it. We'll save it. But this has been awesome. I hope you have a long car ride, so you have a chance to just listen to. You could just be in here on the conversation. And if you guys have any ideas too, obviously, Michael, where can they find you on Twitter if they want to send you any ideas, or just follow you for good old fashioned Twitter content, the tweeter content as I call it here? at 144Captain. And can I give a shout out?
Absolutely, please do.
To my buddy Tashawn, he has his own podcast over at Wrestle Chat. He's a good guy. He wants me to guest in sometime, and I would like him to maybe come over here sometime and we could do something. But he's a really cool cat, and he's got a lot of really good opinions, and he definitely disagrees with a lot of stuff I like. So that could be fun.
Always good to have differing opinions. While you're doing that, too, I'll shout out, obviously, Zach Smith's Random Wrestling. Go check that out if you haven't already. He does a great job on there. He's our NXT host. We're on Patreon. It's $1 a month. We're on iTunes. If you don't mess with Patreon for some reason, it's like $2.99 a month or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's ad-free, and it's for a reasonable price. So go check it out if you hate ads, because I hate ads. I hate to tell you all of this after a 2-hour-long podcast where you had to listen to ads if you didn't subscribe to either of those things. However, now you know, for next time, $1 a month on Patreon. And there's a bunch of other awesome tiers, too, and obviously a bunch of awesome stuff coming here on the WWE podcast. Hopefully more shows like this. Maybe we'll get a Rampage review show going. It's just a lot of... It's a good time to be a wrestling fan, and it's a good time to be a fan of wrestling podcasts. So... Michael, thank you again, obviously, for coming on, and we'll this is our pilot episode. We've got a lot of kinks to work out for sure, but I like the idea nonetheless.
And send everybody, send us ideas. I mean, like, if you want to hear different opinions or anything else, I'm game, and I have certain days that Mimi and I can like kind of get together. If she's game, I would love to play along and let's have some fun. Like, you want a show? Let's do a show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to somehow, the idea we talked about at the beginning of the show too a little bit with gimmicks is tough because there's not a lot of good gimmicks anymore. A lot of the good gimmicks are in the past, but if we really want a kind of a new school, old school debate, I don't know, let's talk about flippy tag team wrestling.
Yeah,
Flippy dippy wrestling. Let's talk about whatever. You know what I mean? There is plenty of stuff that again I think is wrestling has evolved immensely, even from the time that I've ever been watching it. So there's definitely a lot of stuff to talk about. We could have a whole debate on the success of John Cena, Michael Gross.
Oh Jesus. Okay, I'm censoring myself. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again. I hope you have a great night, and I hope all of you have a great night or evening or day or morning or whatever time you're listening to this. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good night. Goodbye.